interview, there was a question that was being asked to a candidate, and the question was that what are the basic differences between a web services and an API? And the guy gave only one liner answer, and the answer was all web services are API, but all APIs are not web services, right? Although he was right or she was right, but when the interviewer went one step more ahead and he said that what is the basic difference between web services and API, I want to tell, and why all web services are API, but why all not APIs or not web services. Can you tell me example of a web service? Can you give me an example of an API? And from there onwards, that that guy has just learned this particular line without understanding the meaning. So I do not want this happen with any of you guys, especially to the freshers. This happens normally with the freshers because and even I've seen with 1 or 2 years of experience guys also, because at some point of time they also tend to get forget. But I don't want this to happen again with any one of you. So without wasting any more time, guys, let's get back onto the lecture, because we do have a lot of interview questions related to the API. I'm just covering it down one by one, and let's see how it goes, right? So there is a specific order, guys, which I have jotted down over here. First this particular line, then the three definitions, and then API, right? There is a specific reason why I have done it into this particular fashion. So first of all, try to understand that this line, this is the difference between web service and API, that all web services are API, but all APIs are not web services. So those, there are some people, you guys must be, after hearing this line, you guys must be able to understand, those who are techie guys. But there are still some people I've seen that they are not very good or not very fluent in English language, or the grammar is not very good. They tend to get confused what is written, what it actually means. They are not able to see anything, only they, although they are seeing it, but they are not able to see what is happening inside. So for them, I have just added particular over here one liner scenarios, like I used to do it. I always take examples which you can associate with your normal life, then only you will be able to understand, right? So what I have written over here is that all good people are human beings, but all human beings are not good people. Is it right? Yes, it is right. Why? Because there are some human beings who tend to become criminal, who tend to do suicide attacks, who tend to become terrorist or XYZ, who do not do any good kind of work. So you cannot say them that these human beings are good people. Simply, again, I'm reacting, all good people are human beings, but all human beings are not good people. In the same way, all web services are API. Just try to understand in that particular stuff, then we'll go ahead. All web services can be termed called as an API, but all APIs cannot be called as web services, right? Why and how, I will just give you a very small demo over that, right? But first try to go through the definition, and then I'll show you something, right? It says that a web service lies between two sets of application. Let's say there are two application. One application is built in Java and another application is built in PHP, right? And it provides a way for all these applications so that they can communicate over a network, right? So if two applications wants to communicate with each other over a network, then it can be done with the help of a web service. Try to understand. Again, I'll be taking a non-technical example over here. Let's say allow me to take a brush over here and write. So let's say this is your eldest. Let's say you there are three people in a house: first brother, second brother, and third brother. This is the eldest of them all, right? Age, let's say 36 years, just imagine. And here is the smaller brother, younger brother, brother one. And let's say this is another smaller younger brother, brother two, right? Let's say both of them were indulged in a fight, like WWE kind of stuff. And at this point of time, they are not talking with each other, right? So the elder guy comes in between, and the elder guy says that, why you guys are not talking to each other? What is happening? So they said that we just had a fight with each other. We are not talking to each other. So in this particular scenario, what these two guys are doing in order to talk with each other, what they are doing is that they are making use of elder brother. He says, I want, you know some a cold drink or a something freshen up kind of stuff, which he has already hidden. So he communicates this, that, hey, have you hidden some sort of a freshen up kind of drink or anything to eat, right? So he responds back, yes I have, and then he says that yes he has and I'll give it to you, right? So he gives it to him, gives this to him. It's just a family scenario. These two guys have already had a fight with each other. They are not talking to each other directly, but so they are talking with their elder brothers, and their elder brother is just acting as a means of communication between these two guys, right? So these can be applications as well. Let's say this is my yatra.com application, right? This is my yatra.com application, and let's say this is my some sort of marriage application that normally occurs in India, right? So this is my yatra.com, this is my marriage application, and if this application needs to communicate with this application, a certain web service would be used so that they can communicate with each other, because it is, let's say, built on PHP language, and it is, let's say, built on Java language, and that too on different platforms. So a web service would be required so that these two applications can interact with each other, right? So this is a basic idea of a web service, right? Now this was totally non-technical, but slowly we'll get into the technical part as well, okay? So a web service lies between two sets of application, right, and provides a way for these applications so that they are able to communicate, that too over a network. So internet is required for a web service, right? Whenever you are trying to book something, whenever you're trying to book a flight, then internet connection is required, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be able to book your flight, right? I'll come to that example as well, but first try to understand the theory, because if theory is not clear, in your entire lifetime you're going to make some at least you will be making some issue or some error at some point of time for sure. Whether you are an automation guy, whether you are a core manual guy, even if you are a developer, because I've seen developers as well, their concepts are not clear, they start coding it, and they try to think that this should get done into this much amount of knowledge, and that too in that much amount of time. So it's not like that. Sometimes theoretical part is also important, right? Okay, anyway, now coming back to the second definition that I have noted it down. So it is just a service which is a network based, and it is used to perform a particular task. For example, fetching data online for flight reservation system, right? So let's say I'll take example of a flight reservation system. Let's say there is a website, Abhinav abhinavyatra.com. Let's say I have my own website, and with the help of this website, people come onto my website and they are able to book their flight, whether Indigo, Air India, anyone, right? And these are all your original websites or applications of your, let's say this is Indigo, this is, let's say, Air India website, this is, let's say, Vistara, right? So people are coming to my website. You can take my website as yatra.com, or you can take my website in terms of understand in terms of goibibo.com as well, right? So people are coming to my website so that they can book tickets. So whenever they try to search for something, you know whenever they apply a certain search criteria, the some sort of request goes to these sites as well, because my website, this is my website, let's say Abhinav has created yatra.com for the time being, let's say, right? If yatra.com website or goibibo.com is my website, that how I am going to contain all the data and all the informations of Vistara, or Air India, or Indigo flights, I do not have, right? So I would be making use of some web services, I would be asking something them, right? And they would be responding to me with some of the data. I would be asking that, is Air India flight available from 7:30 a.m. morning? They will be saying yes, Air India flight is available from 7:30, or they will say that it will be available from 9:30 a.m. onwards. In the same way, this thing will also go through to Indigo, and I will be saying that, is there any Indigo flights available from India to, yeah, let's say, from India to America? So they will say, if they have, they will return back. If not, they will return with some other results, right? So a web service would be required over here so that two applications can interact with each other, that too over the internet. Internet word or a network word is very important. Every time this network word is being used, it basically means that if there is no internet or if there is no network, these web services which are sitting in between these two applications, they won't be working. They would be totally down. Web services would be down, right? They won't be working. Why? Because internet is required over here. So this was the second definition. The third definition: in order to enable machine to machine interaction, that too over network, a web service is used to perform a specific task. So this was my specific task. I hope you guys have got idea, right? I, in my computer system, let's say I have a MacBook Pro. This is one machine. There is a Windows machine over here. There is a Linux machine over here. I know I've made a mess, but let me clear it out. It's not looking good, really. So let's say this is a Linux machine. Let's say this is a Windows machine, right? I do have a Mac machine over here. And from my website, Yatra, Abhinav Yatra, let's say .com, I want to book all the details, right? So here it is, let's say Indigo server, and here let's say of server of Air India. Let's say, just imagine, right? So internet would be required, and there would be web services that would be fetching me all the data from this website to this particular website, right? Via network. So what it means over here, that in order to enable machine to machine interaction, if you want this machine to interact with this particular machine over the internet, a web service would be required, right? So guys, this was just the definition of web services. Okay, and over here again, coming back, it says that web services are API, but all APIs are not web services. For that, you need to first understand what an API is all about, right? So please pay a very close attention to what definition I have jotted it down over here. It says that API, it simply defines the methods like in Java. Just try to imagine at this point of time, right? With the help of which one software program can interact with another software program. Okay, and now what is an API? Then again, you will be able to understand what web services are. So I'll quickly cover it with the help of this particular example, right? Let's say I have already created a particular method over here, like preparing a food. Already created it in order to save some of the time at least, right? So let's say I have created a particular method, prepare food, right? And there are two values I have passed, like food items. If I provide food items and if I give you a kitchen, you will be able to prepare the food, right? I can call this method directly because it is a static method, and it can be called directly or it can be called via class name, right? So I'll call it directly, okay, over here, right? So prepare food. I need to provide two things over here. Food items, let's say in food items, I have given you some eggs, and I have already provided you the main kitchen. These two things I have given it to you, or I have provided it to you. If I print it out over here, it will simply say that dish has got prepared, right? So this is one of the methods, right? And it will allow something to happen at some point of time. Okay, if you want that your food needs to be prepared, you are calling this function. Again in the same way, n number of methods you can define over here, right? Preparing food, preparing, let's say, tea, right? Over here, instead of food, I'll say coffee. What I have to provide over here, I have to give you tea, so that in the kitchen, so that you can prepare tea. And over here, I have to provide you a coffee so that you can prepare a coffee, right? So these are the three different methods that I have created over here, right? And whenever I am going to call them, this thing would be getting prepared, my dish would be getting prepared. It means that there are three methods. And all these methods, guys, please listen very, very carefully. I'm reiterating. I tend to reiterate things a number of times so that it gets stuck onto your mind. All these methods are known as API. API is nothing. If you are getting confused with this word API, if you are getting irritated, just simply remove this word from your mind and install a new word onto your mind. And let's say coding. It's just a coding that we do normally in any language: Java, Python, C, C Sharp, XYZ, right? So it's just a coding done over here. So what is the definition? It simply defines the method. So coding, with the help of coding, you will be able to define some methods, and with the help of these methods, one software program will be able to interact with another software program, right? two software programs will be able to interact with each other. So what are the two software programs? The biggest example is already present on to your screen. I am using a Windows over here, guys, right? So this is my Windows. This is already a software. It is a very big software. It is an operating system, right? And the another piece of software over which I tend to get to use is that, let's say this is a Chrome browser, this is another software, let's say Java IDE is a software, right? So there are two softwares present over here. Please listen very carefully. If I want my operating system that if I click onto this particular item, this item should get opened up, right? It means that one software is trying to interact with another software. Then what is happening internally? An API is still getting fired, although you are not able to see where this API is, because it is not onto the internet or a web where you can just go to the network tab and you can see all the requests getting passed. But at this point of time as well, if you click, let's say I am clicking this particular icon, I have clicked it over here, right? This is like photos section. So I clicked it and it got opened. Why? Because a coding was written inside this operating system. And I hope you guys know that in operating system a hell lot of coding is being done, right? So that everything gets worked onto a particular fashion, and that too in a proper manner. Okay. So again, coming back to my example, I've written that when you click on a particular software in an operating system, that is, let's say you click on an Excel file, then also API is getting called. And what is an API? These are set of code inside my Windows system. Let's say this is a Windows operating system. It is written, if clicked on this particular item, MS Paint should get opened. It should not happen that MS Paint should get opened and closed. So strict coding has been done. If clicked over here, then it will get opened. If clicked on cross item, this cross item, it will get closed. So there is a lot of coding over there, which in a normal life you do not tend to see, right? But API, those set of codes are basically known as API. It's just a term, a different term, right? Like, let's say at some point of time you say that I am praying to God, and at some point of time you say that I am just remembering God. You are doing the same thing. It's just in the same way. API gets fired. In the technical terms, we tend to say that API is getting called or API is getting fired. What it is getting fired? The code that is being written. So the code is being getting called, the code is getting fired. So again, I reiterate, if there are some guys tend to get confused with the API word itself. They think that very typical kind of word it is like application programming interface, and it looks quite difficult to them. Just think it in terms of, it is just a piece of code. So a piece of code will help one software program to interact with another software program, right? And when these pieces of code, when these small codes, when they run without internet, they are called API. But if via internet I start accessing all these methods, then they simply become a web service. So this is one of the basic difference between an API and a web service. For an API to run over here, if I close, sorry, I cannot close my internet, otherwise my session get would not work properly. But for these APIs to work, for this code to work, internet is not required. I hope you guys know. For in if you want to run your Eclipse programs, internet is not required, right? In the same way, in the same way, when these APIs would be called over the internet, they will simply become a web services, and web services are heavier. Their architecture is heavier as compared to the API, right? So I hope I have made some sense. If not, again I'll reiterate everything again, right? But first try to understand the difference between API and web service. So you guys know that API is nothing but API is just these pieces of code, these three functions. Let's say only these three functions are API. Only think only of these three functions at this point of time. So when these functions are called internally, or let's say without internet, because internet is not required, then you can say them that these are the APIs that are being getting called. But if you start accessing them with the help of an internet or via a network onto a network, they will simply call as web service, right? So this is the basic difference, okay? And when you call them over the internet, then web services would be communicating with the two applications in three different styles. They would be using either SOAP, web service, or REST, or an XML RPC. So what this means, I'll make you try to understand. I'll simply make you guys so that you are able to understand. Let's say, let's say again taking this example, the elder brother is sitting in between, and these are two smaller or younger brothers over here. They both of them had a fight with each other, right? So how he can communicate with his two younger brothers, right? I've written it over here. Just coming back to this particular point. So web services at this point of time, the elder brother is a web services, right? He is enabling the communication from this application to this application. Okay, so they would be using three styles, that is SOAP, REST, and XML RPC. That is SOAP, S, REST, first letter R, and then XML RPC means XR. I am just making these small illustrations so that you're able to learn all these points that are written over here. So when the web API, sorry, when the web service is trying to, communicate, is trying to make a connection from this application to this application, and then from here back to here, this here, or if you try to understand in terms of three brothers, if this brother is trying to, make communication from brother one to brother two, there are three different ways by which, he can communicate, right? Either he can communicate to him in a very silly manner, right? Either he can communicate in a very rude manner. R stands for rude, let's say. And XR, which means that XML RPC. XR basically means extremely rude, right? So just for your learning purposes, I am noting it down. Extremely rude. So these are the three ways in which your elder brother can communicate with both of you. He can communicate to you in a very silly manner. He can communicate to you in a very rude manner. He can also communicate to you guys in a very extremely rude manner, right? So just to learn this point, so web services are making use of three styles. Now coming back to the API discussion. So whenever your web making use of web services, it will try to communicate within the two applications in three different ways. Either it will make use of SOAP protocol or REST or XML RPC. These are the way of communication, while API may use any style for communication, right? So where are the APIs? Yeah. So the APIs may communicate with each other in any style. Like these two small brothers can communicate each other in any different manner. Either they can throw their shoes at each other. He can also throw his own shoe towards him. He can throw his clothes. So they can communicate in any direction, in any way, in any language. They can also abuse each other as well. I mean, right? Just a family example. So when we talk about in terms of web services, and when we talk about in terms of an API, web services would be using only three different styles, that is SOAP, REST, and XML RPC, and API would be using any style for communication, right? And the last point, which is very important in order to understand, is that API are having a very lightweight architecture, right? And they are suitable for limited bandwidth devices, but web services are requiring internet. And for sending data from one machine to another machine, let's say if they make use of a SOAP protocol, a lot of information is being getting passed over there, right? So it becomes a little bit of weighted architecture. First, in terms of, again, if you want to learn it, I'll explain you into this particular fashion. Since it is the elder brother, so his age may be greater than both of them, his weight must be greater than both of them, right? So since he is the most elder guy, so he would be having, uh, greater weight as compared to the small kids, right? Whereas APIs, the small younger brothers are known as APIs, let's say, they would be having lesser weight. So you can just learn it in terms of way, whatever you can think. So I learned it into this particular fashion, or other people have learned into this particular fashion, that they tend to forget that API is lightweight, or or, or web service is lightweight. So web service, let's say, was your younger brother. Younger brother means great height, greater weight as compared to this younger kids. So it would be having a weighted architecture, and it would be having a lightweight architecture. just for learning. Now coming back in order to understand it, right? So guys, what happens when web services are trying to communicate from one particular system to another particular system, right? And if they are making use of a soap message, right? So what happens, a soap message I have described onto my next lecture. So there is a lot of information that is being passed over the internet. Over the internet, when you are trying to make communication between two application, let's say you are booking data from my website yatra.com, and you are trying to gather data from, Indigo, Vistara, Air India. A lot of data, if you are using soap, will be getting passed over here, right? But if you are using simple and API, then a very small amount of data gets passed, because only JSON is being passed in the terms of, when we talk about API. I can show you guys how, what I'm trying to say, but I can do it in onto my later lecture, because I don't want to waste any more time onto this very small question, although I have elaborated it very much. Okay, so in order to remember, there are only 4 points that you need to remember while trying to go for a particular interview. All web services are API, but all APIs are not web services, right? It means, simply means that all software engineers are graduate, but all graduates are not software engineers. Some graduates become businessmen, some graduates become para commandos, some graduates become, doctors as well. Okay, so this is how you can learn it. And why all APIs are not web services? Because let's say there is a web service and it is making use of a SOAP protocol, it becomes quite heavy. I mean, a lot of data gets passed. But in case when you are using an API has a very lightweight architecture. Okay, and web services is using three styles of communication: SOAP, REST, and XML RPC. So SOAP means in a silly manner, R means your brother would be talking to you in a very rude manner or in an extremely rude manner, with the example that I have already shown it to you, right? And while API may use any style for communication, you two younger brothers can communicate in any fashion, right? Via bat or via baseball bat, you can communicate with each other, right? So just to remember it, that API have a lightweight architecture and they are suitable for limited bandwidth devices, right? Like mobile phones, app, or and your small Android devices kind of stuff, right? But web services require internet for sending data from one machine to another machine, making use of SOAP. So it is not a lightweight architecture. It is a heavyweight architecture. And why? Eh, it is a weight architecture because enormous amount of data gets passed over there, right? And web services need internet, while API do not need any internet. If these are my APIs, in order to run them, in order to call them, I can simply call them without any use of, without even turning on my Wi-Fi router. Without any internet, still my program would be getting run. But if they become a web services, if I need to communicate something over the internet, then internet would be required for a web services in order to run, right? So guys, I hope I have made some sense in order to make you guys understand. I have also used some of these basic real life examples. I hope I have made some sense and you guys are able to benefit from this particular example, right? So guys, thank you for your time and thank you for your patience. Thanks a lot.